Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, where we explore the pre-crisis DC multiverse and the legacy of the Golden Age characters through the Silver and Bronze Age of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. In this episode of the Earth 2 podcast, we are going to be discussing issue 137 of The Flash, first published in April 1963, the same month as Batman 156, Robin Dies at Dawn. In fact, fans...
Famous cover there.
Yep.
So, Flash 137, written by Gardner Fox, with pencils from Carmine Infantino and inks by Joe Giella.
Yep, so this is the third time Barry and Jay Flash team up together, and the cover, lovely lurid sort of purple with Barry and Jay just basically punching each other on the jaw.
Yeah, Barry's punching Jay so hard in the face its helmet's coming up.
Yep, and in the background we have Vandal Savage.
Flying
up in the air, and he's saying, "While the two Flashes fight it out for the privilege of capturing me, I'll make my getaway." And the cover caption says, "A new double Flash thriller, Vengeance of the Immortal Villain." So this is Vandal Savage making his first reappearance since the Golden Age. Vandal, who first appeared in issue 10 of the quarterly Green Lantern title.
Yes.
Back in the day. So he's initially an Alan Scott baddie. Mm-hmm. But he's causing trouble for the Twin Crimson Comets, isn't he?
He certainly is.
So we open, and the splash page features Barry sort of... It looks like he's just kind of bouncing. He's kind of maybe trying to click his heels together, and Jay, he looks quite riled, quite perturbed. It looks like he's kind of...
sinking into the ground.
Sinking into the grass there. Mm-hmm. And Vandal is in a weird sort of little spaceship effort, and he's zapping in both with rays, and it says The Flash at the top in big letters, and there's a caption box out which describes what's going to be going on, little shot of Vandal's head, little shot of Barry and Jay, and it actually gives a little bit detail away of how the story plays out. That we're not. I don't want to cover that because it's better if we just get to it and read the story.
Yes.
So we open
Washington DC,
Yep.
high above the Capitol Dome, an eruption of glittering lights in the night sky,
and someone is shouting, "The mysterious skylights, just as they appeared over 5 other cities this past week."
Thank you, exposition
yes,
man.
some nice, useful, handy exposition there. And it's a nice shot, as Pete says. Carmine's still absolutely knocking it out of the park at this point. So we have these sort of weird, it's a deep blue sky, and these sort of weird angular sort of pink lights that are beams almost, that are sort of stretching up and curving round and cutting over each other. And
you see the Capitol building there.
Yep.
Yeah, in a lovely silhouette. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
At their appearance, every engine within a 10-mile range instantly stops. Electric lights blink out, motor cars come to a dead stop. Even flashlights don't work.
And we have a couple of Washington punters, and there's a lady saying, "The city's come to a standstill."
What's causing these queer phenomena?
Says another man in a nice hat.
Yes, and it's interesting because the woman seems to have some sort of lighter or something she has.
I think they're both holding candles.
Okay, yes, they are. She's in the distance, it's hard to tell. Yeah. He's got a big, really waxy candle right at the front.
If you pardon the expression.
Rather unusual walking in with that.
Yep.
So moments later, in the Pentagon,
there's a couple of military types, and one of them saying, "Suppose an enemy attacks, we couldn't fire a gun to stop him."
Another one says, "For all we know, these lights are an enemy attacking us."
So we then cut to a radio newsroom.
The 6-city blackout becomes a hot issue from coast to coast.
And we see a radio announcer, and he's saying, "Who is causing these disastrous skylights? Every country disclaims responsibility. Unless we find out soon, more cities will be hit, and our country will become completely paralysed."
One man alone on Earth is in a position to guess at the strange, almost incredible answer, and we cut to Barry and Iris in...
It looks like Iris's office, because there's a filing cabinet and she's got her typewriter and stuff.
Barry's getting ready to leave because he's just putting his coat on there.
Yep.
And Iris says, "Washington, bathed by those lights, and before that, Gotham City, Calvin City, and those 3 others. I wonder who's next."
"Odd," says Barry. "Each of these cities rings a bell in my memory, but I can't understand why. Come on, Iris, I'll walk you home."
Barry walks Iris home, and it cuts to him walking home from Iris's, and I have to question the area in which Iris lives, because he walks past a place that's obviously some sort of sketchy payday loan place called Loan.
Yeah, the caption says, all the way home from Iris West's apartment, Barry Allen ponders the faint memory of the city name. So he could have wandered, like, it's maybe quite a stretch from Iris's bit to his bit, and he's taken a shortcut through the Nudie Rudy area.
Yeah, because as well as this sketchy payday loan place, there's a nightclub called Smoke with a picture of a lady's face there, and it says dancing on a sign there.
And there's a beatnik guy with his portfolio under his arm and a goatee beard and a little hat walking past.
I'm a bit concerned about the sort of establishment that's around about
what looks
Iris's
like
house.
what looks like an off-duty military fella just behind Barry as well. So, yeah, between Barry and Iris' apartment is Central City's red light district. So Barry is thinking to himself, Calvin City, Washington, Gotham City, what have they in common?
And then as he puts his key in the door lock when he gets home...
Of course. I just remembered, it struck me like a flash.
Oh, Barry. Turning to a wall cabinet in his room, he brings out a map of what appears to be the Earth.
Barry's thinking to himself, I'm the only person in my world who's ever seen this map of Earth. This is the Earth of my good friend Jay Flash Garrick, where there's a Keystone City in the place of Central City where I live. I was right. The cities where the skylights appeared are cities on the other Earth where the members of the former Justice Society of America resided. Barry's sort of holding a copy of issue 37 of All-Star Comics, which was the title that the Justice Society appeared with during the Golden Age, and he's thinking to himself, how well I remember these colourful heroes from my boyhood reading of All-Star Comics. Hawkman, Dr. Midnight, the Atom from Calvin College in Calvin City. Wonder Woman worked in Washington in those days. Green Lantern was in Gotham City, and good old Johnny Thunder. And Barry continues to think, since each of the cities where the skylights have appeared correspond to the cities where those Justice Society members live, those lights might be connected with them. It's a long chance, but it's worth investigating.
So, an instant later, he touches a secret spring in his ring, exposing his Flash costume to inflating oxygen. And then, another classic Carmine Infantino panel, you've got the Flash streaking across a lovely background silhouette of Central City.
Yep. And Barry's thinking to himself, any possible hope of stopping those skylights makes this trip to that other Earth of Jay Garrick well worthwhile. Practically everything that happens in his world also happens in mine.
Interesting, that other Earth, not quite designated Earth 2 yet.
Yep.
Although I believe in some of the reprints of this issue, it does actually state Earth 2.
What we sort of notice here is the next panel, the next sort of caption panel, has been edited for the reprint that's in the Greatest Flash Stories Ever Told
and
collection.
Probably other reprints.
The story was also reprinted comparatively soon after in issue 213 of The Flash. We'll put the cover of that up because it's lovely. It's by Neil Adams. Anyway, the original caption that follows on from Barry's little speech there says, at a focal point between these worlds, the Central City Community Centre, Flash vibrates as he did once before. But in the reprint it says,
at a focal point between these worlds, the Central City Community Centre, Flash vibrates as he did in his first adventure on Earth 2.
Interesting.
So yes, after Earth 2 is established, they decided to change the wording.
Yeah, and there's a little asterisk in the caption said, editor's note, see Flash 123, Flash 2. It reminds me of, when Marvel Tales would reprint Spider-Man stories. They would sometimes doctor the footnotes and some of the bubbles to make it seem as if they were actually contemporary with the contemporary Spider-Man stories. That's interesting. I've never really twigged. So anyway, Barry's standing on the stage at the community centre that we last saw in Flash.
Fortunately, it's empty. There's no one in, as ever.
Flash 123. And he's on stage, empty chairs, and he's vibrating, and he's saying, by vibrating at a certain speed, I'm sure to cross over the spatial helix linking my Earth with that of Jay Garrick.
Moments later, he is racing through Keystone City.
Since I know where my Flash counterpart on this Earth lives, I'll make his home my first stop.
So within split seconds, at the home of Jay Garrick, 5252, there we go again, 78th Street, Keystone City, USA.
And it's and Joan answers the door.
Oh, Barry Allen, come in. Jay will be so glad to see you as soon as he returns.
He's not home, Joan?
He's out on a case at the moment. But he'll be back shortly. Please sit down and tell me what brings the Flash to this Earth.
So Barry's relaxing, he's taking his mask off. And
one thing I really like about Barry is he's a casual guy. He likes to sit down in a chair.
Yep.
He likes to take the mask off when he's in a comfortable situation.
Yep.
It's great. So, next page. But before Barry Flash can explain his mission, Jay Flash returns home.
And Joan brings in a tray with some sandwiches and some coffee on it.
You boys are in for a long gab fest, so here are some sandwiches to munch on.
So Barry starts explaining to Jay what's going on. He says, Jay, in my world there are mysterious lights in the sky that...
And then Jay interrupts, what? The same lights are in my world, listen. And after each superhero tells his story, Jay says, what you're telling me is most interesting, Barry. I've just returned from those 6 cities you mentioned. And when I checked up in each of the cities, I found out that my old Justice Society buddies have disappeared.
Well, that seems to be the clincher, all right, says Barry. There must be a connection between the appearance of the skylights and the disappearance of those JSA members.
And Jay responds, if we're right, the next appearance of the skylights may very well be over my hometown, Keystone City.
Possibly to draw your attention to it, so you'll disappear too.
And then, before their staring eyes...
Yep, so Barry and Jay are looking out the window, and again it's the big sort of overreaching, crossing over pink lights, sort of stretching out over a dark sky.
And Jay exclaims, there it is, exactly as the lights appeared over the other 6 cities.
And Barry says, corresponding to the skylights in my own world. but whoever or whatever is causing them is in for a surprise. So, on to page 6.
Through a city blanketed by darkness raced the two fastest men alive.
Yep. Barry and Jay are bombing along empty streets.
Jay says our unknown menace plans on capturing the Flash.
And Barry says, but he can't anticipate that there will be two Flashes on hand to fight him.
Their keen eyes search everywhere for the device causing the strange skylights. And they appear to be in some sort of park land area.
And again, we can see the sort of deep blue sky with the lights sort of stretching up in the background. Mm-hmm. And Jay says,
since each skylight appeared over different cities, there must be some kind of gadget around here creating it.
And Barry says, it shouldn't take long to find it at the rate we're travelling.
Then, on a side road, some miles outside the city...
Do you know what, before we go any further, it's interesting that they surmise that there must be some kind of gadget. Mm-hmm. I guess the beams must look artificial.
Yeah, like scientific beams, supposed to be sort of magical interference, or any alien...
So yeah, Jay's speeding along and he sees what looks kind of like a mini sort of satellite radar sort of sky dish on a little...
It's a fantastic panel of Jay skidding to a halt. Yeah. Fantastic Infantino work, yeah.
And Jay says,
there it is, I'll shut it off, restoring everything back to normal in Keystone City. But as the Scarlet Speedster reaches for the strange engine, another machine nearby suddenly shoots out a beam of light.
And so, yeah, Jay sort of ground to a halt and he stood up straight, and it looks like a little sort of TV camera-esque silhouette is sort of emerged from the ground, it looks like behind him, and it's sort of shooting him with a yellow beam, and a sort of transparent box is appearing around him.
And Jay thinks, oh, a cube of some sort forming around me, holding me rigid. After the cube forms solidly about him, it lifts upwards into the air, carrying the helpless Jay Flash inside it. And Jay's thinking, no chance of Barry rescuing me, he can't fly through the air. It looks like we've lost our fight with the Skylight Menace.
So the panel then cut on the start of the next page has Jay's box floating along and Barry's running after it. And the caption tells us, momentarily stunned by surprise at what has happened, the Scarlet Speedster leaps forward only to have his fingertips graze the cold surface of the curious cube. And Barry says, missed, it's just moving beyond my reach.
So then, in classic Barry action, Barry Flash races in tight circles below the flying cube.
And Barry thinks to himself, by causing a suction whirlpool, I might be able to draw it down so I can grab hold of it. And all this time, Jay in his transparent plastic cube is still floating upwards.
His desperate attempt is crowned with failure, though.
And Barry's saying the downdraft just wasn't strong enough. Whatever force has the cube in its power is too powerful to budge.
Over Keystone City moves the odd cube, and racing up a building wall to intercept it, speeds Barry Flash.
Whatever hope I have of stopping those skylights in my world will involve saving Flash first.
And indeed, Barry is running up the side of a building to gain some height.
And the next panel we'll see him on the roof of a building, and Jay's just passing overhead, and Barry says, it's just a foot away, but it might as well be a mile.
Down one building and up another, only to fail again and again. The Flash rockets up the last tall building in the city.
Yep, Keystone obviously finishes very abruptly, because just beyond the building we can see some rocks and stuff that looks like the desert.
Not even farmland, straight there.
So Jay's just out of reach again, and Barry says, this is my last chance. There are no other buildings after this to go up within reaching distance of the cube. So Jay's flying just ahead, and Barry's screeching to halt because, as he says, too late, it's moving beyond the roof edge. As Jay, in this box, just keeps firing on forward. And with a wild, despairing, broad jump, Barry flings himself out into the empty air. So he's obviously thought, right, got to try again. Got to risk everything on this final try, he says.
His feet touch the solid surface of the cube, but...
I reached it, but I can't keep my footing. So we've got a nice overhead shot of they're very, very high up, and Barry's starting to slip off the box.
Quickly, he begins to rotate his arms like propellers, and their frantic pounding of the air lifts him slowly upright.
So Barry thinks, I've gained my balance. So he drops down to his knees, the caption tells us, and he drives the edge of his hands at the cube so hard and so swiftly that it blurs. And Barry thinks to himself, at such speeds, my hand equals the battering power of a dozen pile drivers.
Karate chopping it straight to bits.
Faster, ever faster move the hand until faint cracks appear in the white cube. The cube's starting to come apart. We see cracks on the glass, basically.
A moment later, the white prison gripping Jay Flash opens and...
Barry thinks, I overlooked it. Once I destroyed the cube, Flash and I would fall earthward.
And they're falling down with all the shattered parts.
And it's interesting, because we can see Jay inside it, I thought it was kind of transparent. But it's interesting it says the white cube, so maybe...
It's translucent, maybe?
Yeah. So Barry and Jay are falling down. Far below, Barry sights the jagged rocks of a scenic wonderland, and Barry thinks to himself, if I don't do something fast, it'll all be over for both of us. Continued on the third page following. So, over the next page, there's a nice house ad for an issue of World's Finest, an issue of Mystery in Space, an issue of Star Spangled War Stories, which is dinosaur comics at that point. I've got that one. And an issue of Sugar and Spike.
Excellent.
So, on to page 10, Vengeance of the Immortal Villain, Part 2. And the caption says...
Hurtling to their doom on the sharp rocks far below, Barry Flash suddenly remembers an episode from his past and reaches out to catch hold of the unconscious Jay Flash. Instantly, his right arm begins to vibrate faster and faster, creating an updraft of air, which lowers them gently towards the ground.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a scene missing, isn't there? Because it's gone from the shot of them and the bits of the cube falling to Barry actually having got hold of Jay. So Barry's now got Jay over his left shoulder and he's looking down and he's sort of
creating an air cushion.
And Barry sort of says to himself, "Luckily I remembered the technique I used once before in a similar situation when I faced the villainous Black Cat of Paris." And we have a footnote which says, "Editor's note, see Showcase 13 around the world in 80 minutes.
Yes. And cushioned by that rising column of air, the two Flashes drop gently downwards.
Another few feet, thinks Barry to himself, and will be safe on solid ground.
So they land on the ground, protected by the rotating right arm of Barry Flash. The duo soon touches terra firma.
So Jay's recovering and he says to himself,
"Oof, I'm still woozy from being in that cube.
Take a breather, Jay, and then we'll go back to the Skylights machine and make another try at turning it off."
Meanwhile, many miles to the south, in a scientifically equipped hideout under Mammoth Caves.
Mammoth Caves. Now, I wonder if are they just saying that the caves are very big, or are they called Mammoth
Caves? Is it a geographical
Caves?
feature referred to as Mammoth Caves?
Interesting. There's a voice sort of emerging from the speech bubble of a voice sort of coming out from the cavern, and the voice says, "What could have happened to the final cube and the Flash inside it?" And then we cut to the inside of the cave, ranged across the panel from left to right, in the same sort of cubes that Jay was being held prisoner. We see Dr. Midnight, Wonder Woman and Hawkman, and on the other side we see the Atom, Johnny Thunder, and it has to be said, a very skinny looking Alan Scott, Green Lantern, and sat in the middle with his back to the camera, as it were, in a big red chair, smoking a cigarette. It's Vandal Savage, the eponymous Immortal villain.
Yes.
And Vandal is saying, "So far everything has gone just right. It was easy to capture the first 6 Justice Society members. I knew the terrible menace of the Skylights I created would bring them out of retirement. As they were about to touch the machines, they unwittingly tripped an electric I-beam that encased them in a cube invented by one of my old Injustice Society pals, Brainwave. No one could have escaped from it." And we have a little footnote.
Yes, saying the Injustice Society of the Worlds, an organisation of the greatest criminals of Earth, appeared in All-Star Comics number 37. That's the October-November issue from 1947.
So that's about, how many years before this one? So this is, let's have a look.
13, 14?
63, so that's about...
more than that.
Yeah, it's about 15, 16
yeah.
years since Vandal last appeared. And it's interesting, the next panel, we see there's all this clearly sort of scientific equipment sort of behind where Vandal's sort of sat, and Hawkman is quite near to where Vandal's sitting. Vandal's turned around now and he's facing towards the JSA, and it looks like he's a talk show host.
It does, he's doing finger point.
Yeah, he's pointing at Hawkman. It's Hawkman's turn to tell us an amusing story in a Parkinson style, and Vandal is saying, 16 years ago, there we go, you Justice Society members captured the Injustice Society and put us away in prison. But what are 16 years to a man like me, who is immortal? Now, 16 years later, I have escaped jail and have begun to avenge my defeat at your hands. And then he's got a cigarette and a cigarette holder, very lavish in this. Yeah. So he's now addressing the Atom, Johnny Thunder and skinny Alan Scott. Vandal says, Green Lantern and his power ring were helpless once the cube closed in on him. Johnny Thunder couldn't speak the words "say you," which would activate his fantastic thunderbolt. Atom's atomic punch was of no avail against my cube prison. The Atom's atomic punch wasn't any use, but Barry was able to do it break it up with high-speed karate chops. Interesting.
Well, the Atom was frozen inside it.
Interesting, but you think maybe he would have tried to...
No, because Jay was frozen inside as well, he couldn't move, so obviously it's suspended animation sort of thing inside the cube.
So, Vandal, whose hair, it has to be said, is getting bigger and bigger by the panel. It's obviously, he has the same hairdresser as the Third Doctor. He's now addressing Hawkman, Wonder Woman and Dr. Midnight. Dr. Midnight couldn't reach his blackout bomb in time to help him. Hawkman's anti-gravity ninth metal failed him, and the Amazon powers of Wonder Woman are encased forever in the cube from which there is no escape.
So basically Vandal Savage is reintroducing these characters and what they do roughly for the new audience, which is very nice of him considering there's no one there to talk to really.
Yeah, I mean obviously when we did Flash 129 we mentioned the fact there's a couple of pages which flash back and you sort of see them in action in the final case, but this is a little introduction. I'm sure this was very exciting for the Golden Age fans who were reading this at the time. So Vandal continues. Or is there a way of escape unknown to me? My instruments show the cube that held the Flash has been destroyed. If Flash could do it, perhaps his fellow members can too. And then, leaning forward in his chair, Vandal continues, in a sense, I made them all immortal when I placed them in the cubes. They will witness my taking over the world, see my wicked triumphs, but completely helpless to stop me. To honour the occasion, I even designed this new uniform I'm wearing.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but when I'm out on a special occasion, I always like to design my own uniform.
Yeah.
That I wear for going out that.
Whenever I plan to take over the world, I not only do I make sure I rustle up a new outfit and design it myself, I also remind myself out loud that I've done it.
Yes.
It's like Vic Reeves, isn't it?
Especially
that was
when
my
you're
idea.
Especially when I'm out looking for vengeance.
Yes, which is every Tuesday night generally, isn't it?
Oh, of course, yes.
Over the next page or two, Vandal gives us a sort of little potted life story.
And the captions read, "Who is this man who wields such awesome powers? To understand, we must go back in time, 50,000 years, to the age of the cavemen, where Vandar Aj was chief of a band of Cro-Magnons. A mighty hunter, a great fighter, this chief was leading his warriors to attack one day, when out of the skies came a screaming fireball."
And that's what we see, some sort of cavemen lads in this big hairy chap with a hammer, or an axe type effort, sort of looking up, and there's a screaming fireball flying towards him.
With a titanic explosion, the flaming meteor burst over Vandar Aj's head. Unconscious, he was carried to his cave. When he awoke, he had become immortal.
It doesn't tell us how he knows, but not to worry,
You just sense these things, I
I
think.
suppose.
He lived on while the Cro-Magnons died out.
It's quite a nice panel of caveman Vandal looking at a fire having burnt out. It's a sort of implication that maybe he's the
Representation of the death of his society.
maybe the sort of sense that maybe he was the last of them. That's quite sad.
Lived to walk the streets of ancient Sumer as its king. Yep, so basically he has risen to power in Sumer. Obviously his immortality, he's gained power. Later, he was known as the Egyptian pharaoh Cheops, builder of the pyramids. And we see him again.
We see some pyramids being built with what looks like very modern, i.e. contemporary
Scaffolding.
20th century construction.
Yeah.
Yep.
How
And then,
bizarre.
then we see him in uniform because he's...
Then Genghis Khan.
Yep.
Yes. Later, he became a power behind history scenes. He was the advisor to Napoleon.
And then we see Vandal and he's saying, "You must attack, sire. The Austrians, the Prussians and the English cannot withstand your power."
Very well, Marshal Sauvage. I will give the necessary orders.
And listen very carefully. I should have said this only once.
And to Bismarck.
Yep. And then we see Vandal addressing another great military figure and he says, "This is a great triumph for your armies, Prince Bismarck."
Yeah, a greater one for your diplomacy, Baron von Savage.
Yes, other accents are available.
Preferable.
Yes.
Until today, having turned his great talents to a quest for Earth domination, Vandal Savage has begun his programme by capturing 6 of the Justice Society members who had imprisoned him.
And we get a nice silhouette panel of Vandal with his cigarette holder in his gob and he's saying, "Only the Flash is still at large to give me trouble. Since I failed to capture him by remote control, I shall go out and do so personally."
Soon he's hurtling in his flying laboratory towards the Skylights machine outside Keystone City.
And Vandal thinks to himself, "If I know Flash, he won't give up, but will attempt to shut off the Skylight's engine again."
As he approaches the hidden machine, he sees...
So yeah, looking down, so we can see Jay running towards the Skylight machine, which is still firing out its beams, and Jay says to himself,
I mustn't get too close to it, or else I'll get caught in another cube.
and Vandal thinks, "There he is, right in my line of fire."
Instantly, a beam of bright light bathes one of the Scarlet Speedsters.
Yeah, we see Jay being caught in a sort of big yellow spotlight, and he says, well, he's thinking to himself,
My feet sinking into the ground. Who? Ooh. Despite his new uniform, I recognise him. It's Vandal Savage, the immortal villain.
despite his new uniform and his ridiculously bouffant hair. So yeah, basically, it looks like, imagine Jay's got caught in quicksand.
Yeah.
And he's sort of sinking down.
A gloating Vandal Savage watches as his nemesis sinks down into the ground.
So Vandal flying overhead, and he's thinking to himself, this heavy ray beam, an invention of another fellow Injustice Society member, the Thinker, who we met in Flash 123.
We did indeed.
Yes. Has made Flash so heavy, he'll sink right through the earth to the core of the planet. Oh no!
That would be terrible.
Oh no!
Then his attention is directed to a second Flash.
Barry's running up and says, "Chin up, Flash, I'll have you out of there in a moment." And Vandal thinks to himself, what's this? Another Flash? Things have changed in the years I've been in prison. Not least in the worlds of hairdressing.
Yes, but maybe fashion, because
Yes.
he had to design his own uniform.
That's true.
Yes, the barrel of the heavy ray beamer swings around towards Barry Flash, deluging him with its glow.
I remember that time that Apure took a heavy ray beamer.
I was deluged that night.
I was
Thoroughly deluged.
It was a riddy. So Barry's thinking to himself, I'm rising into the air like a balloon. And then Vandal in his sort of little spaceship-y effort, it looks though it's changed shape actually, or maybe it's just the angle.
Just the angle, I think.
Vandal's thinking to himself, by reversing the controls of this ray machine, I can also make whoever it hits lighter than air.
And
unless
Flash
something
is-
stops him, he will drift into outer space. Yeah, because Barry is now drifting up and floating away.
Then, Vandal Savage, with a toss of his mighty arm, sends a cable lasso rising towards the helpless Scarlet Speedster.
So Barry thinks to himself, my super speed is useless. No matter what I do, I can't make myself heavier. And Vandal is shouting, I'll save you, Flash, because I have a different doom prepared for you. So we now move on to page 16, which is just one of those little half pages with an advert underneath.
And the caption reads, the noose closes around the floating Flash, anchoring his upward climb.
So Vandal's thinking to himself, my anticipated pleasure of capturing Flash has been doubled with the capture of a duo of Flashes. So in his little space rocket, spaceship effort is flying along, and we can see that he's tagging Barry along behind him. But also, as we see in the next panel, as it flies along, he's dragging Barry along above him, but below him, he's dragging Jay through the ground.
Yes, because he's sent a specially treated cable lasso down into the very ground itself to capture Jay.
And Vandal thinks this Flash has gone far enough. So we move on to the next panel, and Vandal is thinking to himself, now all that remains is to tow them both to my hideout, put them in cubes, and keep them as living mementos of my victory over the Justice Society. And then there's a little headbox caption thingy of Vandal telling us the story continues on the third page following.
We pass over the Flashgrams letters page. There's a letter in here from Paul Gambaccini.
And there's one from E. Nelson Bridwell.
Oh, excellent.
Which is good. And then we move into, finally, Vengeance of the Immortal Villain, Part 3.
High in the air, one Flash is towed like a balloon. Beneath the ground, the other Flash is dragged like a fish below water. Their vaunted super speed seems useless to help them avoid the sinister plans of Vandal Savage.
And Vandal is crying out, I overcame not only one, but two Flashes. The extra one is like a bonus for my wickedness. Ha! Ha! Ha!
Very good, Vandal, very good. Floating helplessly at the end of his cable lasso, Barry Flash thinks furiously.
I'm being carried along like a balloon, or a hooked fish, but even a fish would struggle to escape.
Grasping the cable lasso, he begins to vibrate it with terrific swiftness.
Barry starts vibrating and he's saying to himself, this ought to shake that villain up a bit.
Far below him, Jay Flash has thought of the same tricky manoeuvre, and Jay says, by shaking the lasso at super swift speed, I ought to be able to make the plane vibrate uncontrollably.
I love how Jay's been dragged along underground. And it doesn't seem to be creating a big sort of gorge in the,
No, because he's underground, but obviously the cable must be causing like a rip in the earth as well.
It's kind of, anyway, so.
Yes, within moments, the double-powered vibrations of the lassos set up a compensatory vibration within the plane itself.
Vandal's like, he's obviously been shaking around.
Voice.
You can move my chair. My plane's going out of control. Everything's shaking so much I can't hold it on course. And sure enough,
yes, its steering mechanism wrecked. By the incessant vibrations, the lab plane plunges groundwards.
And we see it hit with a massive crash, and Vandal gets flung from the machine.
Obviously not wearing a seatbelt, he smashes through the windscreen.
And Barry is still floating above it.
Thrown clear of the wreckage, Vandal Savage sees the two Flashes drag themselves towards his flying laboratory.
And Vandal thinks to himself, they can turn my own weapons against me. I'm not prepared to fight two Flashes armed with my weapons. I've got to get away.
Edging its way along the lasso, Barry Flash grasps the heavy ray machine and, reversing its controls, blasts his counterpart with the lightness beam. A little less lightness, Barry. I'm starting to float now, says Jay.
Jay's kind of emerged from the ground, and Barry's kind of pulled himself down, and he's operating some of the switches. And in the next panel, Jay's standing, doffing his cap, as Barry still floats there.
And says, thanks pal, I'm back to normal now. Let me return the compliment.
And Barry says, okay, I was never cut out to be a balloon.
After being restored to proper weight, the Monarchs of Motion begin their hunt for Vandal Savage.
Barry says, no trace of him. We could spend hours, days searching for his hideout.
Seconds, Barry. Now that I know Vandal Savage is behind this, I know from the Justice Society's previous encounter with him where he makes his hideouts. Outside the Mammoth Caves in Kentucky at that moment.
And it looks like Vandal is he flying? Or
He's
is he
flying.
just... Vandal is just sort of, loading into frame, and he says, I've borrowed ideas from my fellow members of the Injustice Society, but I also invented a few of my own. This uniform, for instance, which is gimmicked to fly me through the air. There we go. Enabled me to escape the Flashes.
He loves
his uniform. He's all about it.
He is a clothes horse.
I hope that someone compliments him on it before the end of the story.
Dedicated follower of fascism. Yes.
So we then get a close-up of Vandal, and he thinks to himself, I used the lab plane to meet them instead of flying under my own power because I wanted to have weapons with which to overcome them. Now that Flash knows who is behind the Skylight's menace, he'll also remember I have a hideout under Mammoth Caves. It's a proper name.
It must be.
Yep.
Into the caves he runs, and to his hideout, where...
My other weapons failed, but this invention of Degaton's won't. My old Injustice Society fellow member didn't go far enough with it, however. He used it merely to paralyse the will. I've improved his beam so I can control the will. Now, this is a reference to a character called Per Degaton, who is a sort of a wannabe would-be time-travelling despot,
Yes.
who we will hear an awful lot from in the future.
Absolutely.
So remember that, write that down, Per Digaton, he'll be back.
You'll be a test.
So we move on to page 20, and Vandal it looks like he's on a scooter or a
Segway.
a pallet truck or something,
okay.
and he's sort of saying to himself, by preventing the Flashes from teaming up against me, by using the will controller to make them battle each other instead of me, it'll enable me to capture them both. And this obviously, he's describing what we see on the cover. And then we see Vandal sort of aiming a trigger, and he's thinking, when the beam from this will controller hits them, it will direct them to fight one another for the privilege of capturing me. When they're so weak they can't fight anymore, I'll encase them in my cubes. And that's not a euphemism.
Unaware of the grim trap and which they are heading, the Flash pair race into Mammoth Caves.
They're almost in semi-silhouette. It was quite nice, isn't it?
Yeah,
As they're getting sort of hit with Vandal's beamer. Vandal says, I've hit them with the invisible beams of the will paralyzer. Now they'll be too busy fighting each other to bother about me.
And instantly the two Flashes turn on one another.
So yeah, we see Barry sort of turn around facing Jay, and Jay's kind of squaring up. Basically, like we see on the cover.
This panel was exactly the same as the cover, yeah.
Jay's punching Barry in the jaw, and Barry's undercutting Jay and knocking his helmet off. It's a trait of Carmine when he does these panels. You know, they're always very recognisable as being the cover image.
Absolutely.
This isn't one of his best. It's the middle panel of three on the bottom, and it's, you know, you feel like maybe it could have been a
bit more showcased.
half a splash page or whatever. So Vandal, sort of in the background as the two Flashes start duking out, and he leaps, and he sort of looks like he's leaping up, and he's saying, while the two Flashes fight it out for the privilege of capturing me, I'll make my getaway to set a trap and capture the winner, if there is one.
Behind him, Barry Flash strums his feet on the rocky ground of the vast caverns.
And Barry thinks to himself, I must overcome Jay, so I, and I alone, can capture this Vandal savage.
As his feet set up tremendous vibrations, jagged stalactites snap off and drop in a deadly shower towards Jay Flash. If Barry thinks he's going to capture my old enemy, he's got another think coming, thinks Jay. Darting between the falling stone spears, Jay Flash rotates his arms at furious speed. I can move just as fast as he can. Let's see how he likes being a target for these stalactites.
So yeah, we're now on page 21, and we have Jay sort of looking up as the stalactites fall towards him, and then he's using his left arm and rotating and spinning. And as the stalactites are falling down, they're being diverted, and the final panel is top tier. They're flying towards Barry.
Creating a mighty wind, he turns the jagged rocks straight at his Flash foe. But Barry Flash, dodging and darting these deadly missiles, circles faster and faster about his fellow Scarlet Speedster.
Yeah, so Barry just runs out the way of the stalactites, and he's bombing round Jay, and Jay's saying to himself,
This vortex of super hurricane proportions is making me spin like a top. There's only one thing to do. And desperately Jay Flash reaches out, grasps his counterpart by an arm. To complete this sort of game.
And we move on to page 22, and Jay has basically grabbed Barry by the left arm, and he's giving it a big swing.
He is. Now it's the turn of Barry Flash to circle around and round.
And Jay thinks to himself,
when I let go, he'll be hurled with super speed and centrifugal force against the rocky cavern wall.
And right enough, Jay lets go of Barry, and we see Barry fleeing towards the cave wall.
Face first.
Yep.
One Scarlet Speedster releases his hold, and the other sails like a bullet towards the jagged rocks. But in mid-flight, Barry Flash's palms push back against the air in a swimming motion so swiftly they break his progress. Inches from the deadly wall, he drops slightly to the ground, and
we see Barry just sort of regaining his feet, and he says, Jay's older than I am, and he can't keep up this speed duel as long as I. I'll try out a super wind on him and see what happens.
So Jay Flash is willing, but his body, so long out of retirement, is close to exhaustion. He is hurled backward by the gale.
Yeah, and in the background we see Barry doing the patented sort of arm twisty sort of tornado sort of thing, and Jay flies into the wall and he dislodges his helmet, and Barry thinks to himself, now, that takes care of him, now to go after Vandal Savage and capture him.
As Barry Flash speeds off, Vandal Savage slips out from behind a stalagmite.
And Vandal's got this sort of, is that something in his belt, or is that his gun?
It's a belt.
Basically it looks like he's shining a ray over Jay, and Vandal thinks to himself, now I can put my old enemy in a cube from which this time there'll be no escape. Ah, there goes the other Flash, vibrating himself into invisibility. But if he thinks to overcome me that way, he's wrong. Dead wrong. Even invisibility can't save him from the clever trap I arranged. I anticipated his possible use of invisibility and guarded against it.
Very forward thinking of him there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Barry Flash is racing from the caves into the scientific hideout below them.
It looks like, Vandal's sort of standing under sort of spotlight shining down on him, and Barry's sort of zooming in towards, and he says, there's Vandal Savage now, waiting to drop me as soon as he sees me. but he'll never get the chance to see me.
Unaware that this Vandal Savage is only a created image of the real villain, the fastest man alive leaps forwards.
Barry thinks to himself, one solid blow will knock him out cold.
And the next panel, we've got a close-up of Vandal Savage with wild, staring eyes, and Barry flashes invisible fist heading towards him.
Closing in, and then Barry says, wait, there's something wrong here.
From a safe distance, he tosses a stone at the figure of Vandal Savage, and
Barry says, I was right. If I'd made contact with that image of Vandal Savage, his inescapable cube would have instantly formed and trapped me inside. So yeah, because he throws the stone in, that strikes the figure of Vandal, and that's what that activates the machine which generates the cube. So there's a nice vroom sound effect, and an empty cube appears.
Indeed.
Now move on to page 24, and this is when it really gets good.
Here we go. Moments later, having heard the exploding image of his duplicate, Vandal Savage races into his hideout.
And Vandal walks in, and he sees what looks like an empty cube, and he says to himself, the trap's been sprung. I caught him. Since he was invisible when the cube formed about him, he'll remain invisible for all eternity. Now all the Justice Society members who imprisoned me are my prisoners. And then we cut to the next panel, and it's sort of the Justice Society are no longer prisoners. They're all standing with Jay and Barry behind Vandal. And Barry's saying, that's what you think, Vandal Savage. And Vandal turns round and he says, huh? You? You're all free. But I created that perfect duplicate. What could have given it away? And we get a nice close-up of Barry, and Barry says, when you created it, the image-making machine must have used so much power, the lights dimmed. In that dim light, the irises of your eyes expanded. Your identical image showed those same expanded irises when, with bright light shining, they should have been contracted. Now, I've got to say, when I was reading it, I thought that I was a bit surprised at that explanation, because I thought maybe Barry would have registered that it was maybe just a still image, or there's nothing, because there's nothing really too much to indicate that it was. Yeah, that it was, or maybe it was just an incredibly realistic 3D dimensional looking hologram.
But I think Barry Police science training picked up on the fact at the last minute that the whole eyeball irises size was wrong. It's comparatively. So yeah,
I'll have to watch for that in future. Actually, I'll have to keep an eye out and see if people's irises are properly condensed or contracted enough to see if they're real people or actually. Anyway,
just
so
do that to people at bus stops and see how you go on. That's good. Right.
So then, so they've caught you, Vandal. And Barry, so continuing, Barry says, warned that your image wasn't real, I tossed a stone at it and then went and freed my friend, the Flash.
Whereupon we raced back and freed my fellow Justice Society members while you were running into this hideout from the caves outside.
So Vandal must have set up the hologram and then ran off. And
Yes. So the Justice Society members converse among themselves as the two Flashes take Vandal Savage back to prison.
Yeah, so we have a nice couple of panels here. The final panel of page 24 shows Johnny Thunder, Dr. Midnight, Hawkman, in probably the most straightforward and simple mask I've ever seen him in.
Yes.
And the Atom, Green Lantern and Wonder Woman. And Dr. Midnight is saying, we'll shut off this master control of the cube-making machines near the skylight engines so we can dismantle them without danger.
And Wonder Woman says, boys, I've been thinking it might be a good idea for us to meet every so often, come out of retirement as it were, to prevent anything like this happening again.
And Green Lantern says, I'm in favour of it.
Johnny Thunder says, me too. And Hawkman says, we'll contact Flash and set a date for a future meeting. And the Atom says nothing at all.
Yeah, so Little Al doesn't get a line. Does Johnny get a line? Yes, he does.
Yeah, he does. He says me too. Yeah,
okay.
He gets a hashtag.
Everyone gets a line except Al. Sorry, Al.
Okay. Soon, all the Skylight's machines have been rendered inoperative, and Barry Flash can now vibrate into his own world, where the lights have also disappeared.
And as Barry sort of fades out, the JSA is all lined up, and Hawkman says,
as the former chairman of the Justice Society, I'm going to call a meeting right now, so Flash can tell us all about his alter ego from that other world. And upon returning to his own world, Barry phones Iris West.
Yep, Barry back at his desk at the police station, and he's saying, now that skylights have disappeared, Iris, how about having dinner with me tonight? And over the phone,
Iris responds, much as I'd like to, Barry, I can't. My paper has assigned me to uncover the story behind the mysterious skylights, and until then, no dates.
And Barry, Barry bow ties are cool, Alan. He's sort of thinking, if I want to see Iris tonight, I'd better hustle right over to her office as the Flash and tell her the whole story.
The end.
So, well,
what do we think of that then?
It's nice having a little scene at the end with Chuck and Alan and everyone, but I felt it kind of, the cover sells it as the Flash is fighting.
Yes.
And it took a while to get to that. We only got it for
for like a page,
basically. Barely a page, yeah. And actually I thought the scenes of them fighting were actually really quite fun. It was quite good, yeah.
We haven't actually had the Reverse Flash yet, so it's rare for...
Yeah, I think he's two issues away.
Later, yeah.
2 issues away.
So it's rare for Flash actually to be up against a super speed adversary. So yeah, that's interesting. And also, it's very good we have now got an explanation from Gardner Fox. What exactly are stalactites and which ones are stalagmites?
Yes, stalactites are the ones that hang down.
Yes, tight to the ceiling, yes.
Yes, and the other ones might reach them one day.
I think you might trip over them.
Yes, well, I'm sure I remember being told at school it was you might.
Okay.
Anyway.
There we go. Yes, that's very good.
So,
another interesting thing that popped up for me was the fact that at some point in his journeys between the two parallel Earths, Barry picked up a map.
Yeah, so there's possibly an unseen story where Jay's providing him with a map so that he knows he's where. Because obviously we know that Keystone and Central pre-crisis the same area on different Earths. So Jay's probably given Barry a map so he knows what other differences. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. Now, I wonder what the sort of the Earth One equivalents of Calvin were. That sort of thing. Because would it be Ivytown? Is that not where Ray Palmer?
Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
Interesting. I wonder.
But it can't be because Iris actually mentioned that's one of the cities.
Right, she did.
On their Earth.
Right. So,
yeah, it might be a similar situation, but it's definitely it's a city in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
interesting.
Major points from this which could cause problems. Right?
Mm-hmm.
In this one, we see the return of JSA, the Golden Age characters, but some of them already exist on Earth 1. Wonder Woman and Hawkman specifically.
Yeah, so, I maybe wonder if that's why Hawkman was drawn with such a sort of different, simplified helmet, just to kind of help differentiate them, maybe. Because the Silver Age Hawkman's been around for just about 2.5 years by this point, but Hal Jordan, what become the Earth 1 Green Lantern, he's long established.
Yes. But the interesting thing is, Barry obviously is a comic fan. And that's established in his very first appearance.
Yes.
And he has a comic collection, and we saw one of those comics in this, which features these characters.
Oh, that's right.
So,
that's right.
On Earth 1, these stories exist in which previous versions of these characters exist as the same character. Yeah,
which means that everyone on Earth 1 who's read a comic will have read a comic that told them Wonder Woman was Diana Prince or Hawkman was Carter Hall.
Or even if it didn't give away secret... Well, it must give away secret identities because Barry knew who Jay was.
Yeah.
But maybe... It's tweaked so if there's a direct counterpart who is the same person,
right?
Then
interesting.
It's some cosmic balance.
Yeah,
it might tell you the story, but doesn't actually tell you who they are.
It'll be interesting to see if anything of that pops up or gets touched on. It probably won't.
Because if that was the case, then Barry at the first Justice League of America team up, who would have said, "Oh, Diana, hello."
Of course.
She would have,
yeah, that's absolutely right.
So
interesting.
Again, it's something that, as far as I'm aware, never comes up.
Yeah. I think, if I'm honest, out of the 3 Flash team-ups that we've done so far, it's probably the one I've enjoyed the least.
Yeah, I'm with you in that. It feels like they're trying out more things, but they're not quite getting there. I think this definitely had a function to do, and that's to bring back the JSA.
Yeah. It's interesting that, say, so much of part 2 is all that nonsense about Barry floating around and Jay getting dragged through the ground. If Vandal had maybe just set them off against each other straight away, maybe to tire them out or something, that sort of thing, that might have given us a bit of a. It's not that I'm itching to see the 2 Flashes fighting, but
it's what
they
it's what's advertised in the cover.
Yeah, and that would have been a bit more interesting than just Barry floating about and Jay getting dragged through the ground. Yeah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So then, that was Flash 137. So we're now going to talk about the reader reaction.
Indeed, we are.
And this is the latest page from issue Flash 140, which is the first appearance of the sort of team up between Captain Cold and Heatwave.
The first Heatwave, yeah.
Yeah, and almost makes me want to do my
No, you're not doing that.
And Mick Rory sort of voices from off of Legends of Tomorrow, but I'm not going to do that.
No, good.
I'm not going to do that.
So, Flashgrams in issue 140. So the first one is from Alden Stallings from Herndon in Virginia. He says, "Dear editor, wow, that inarticulate but tremendously effective phrase is the only apt description for the June Flash Vengeance of the Immortal Villain, which should be billed as the best ever to come out of a comic book."
So it was well received at the time.
Yes.
Maybe we're just being too fussy. I don't know.
Starting as it's customary from the beginning, I could easily be convinced that this issue's cover is your most attractive, showing as it did the brightly garbed Flashes scuffling in an intriguingly coloured subterranean cavern, while the less colourful but obviously villainous Vandal Savage leers off towards the right. Soon after tearing my eyes from the cover long enough to open the book, I began to become really impressed. As one of your latter generation readers, fundamentally unacquainted with the legendary Justice Society of America, I was thrilled to see this organisation become part of the story, albeit very small. The plot itself was fascinating. This is the first time our flashy duo has been called upon to fight one lone villain, but what a match it was. Vandal Savage, though not new, is certainly one of the most original characters existing. Being the best of the 3 old new Flash stories so far published, this issue automatically becomes, in my opinion, the best comic ever. Well, we've already said we disagree with that, but hey, it's...
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we didn't really say. I mean, I think Vandal Savage as a character is brilliant. He's great.
Yeah,
I mean, I've always liked him. I think there's moments when I think he's been a little bit overused and in there, but as an idea that he's immortal and has lived through all this sort of time, and it's cracking. As Alden was saying there about the cover, we've not really talked about it. What I really like about the cover is that, as well as the sort of absolute beautiful textured detail of the cave, Jay's very centred on it. You don't see Barry's chess symbol. It's almost like Jay's the star of the show and Barry's the villain that Jay's knocking out.
True.
It's nice. It's a covers. Yeah, don't judge a book by the cover in this case, in my opinion.
But you always judge comics by the cover.
Exactly. So the response to Alden's letter says, when we put the June Flash to bed, it was with the satisfied feeling that it rated as one of the best all-round issues of our long editorial career. Our only regret is that we didn't take the precaution of equipping ourselves with an umbrella as protection from the showers of praise that have been heaped on us for vengeance of the immortal villain. That's interesting. Are we being too cynical? I mean, I imagine it must have been really exciting because
at the time, yes.
At this point, it's like there's not been a JLA, JSC team up yet.
No.
There hasn't been a Green Lantern team up yet. The Spectre hasn't been revived yet, etc. I mean, this is only the third
of the Flash team ups.
Technically, only the third Earth 1, Earth 2 sort of story. Obviously we've established and discussed a few other sort of parallel sort of stories. It's probably the case that the anticipation for this was probably huge.
Absolutely, yeah.
People would think, right, when it's 8 issues after the last one, so the Flash is probably semi-monthly at this point. Monthly with the exception of, and it's not like it's all bad. And it does rattle along and it's quite exciting, but it's just we're maybe just sort of feeling that it would have been nice if they'd fought each other a bit longer, if the Justice Society had been a little bit more involved in the resolution. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the second letter, and this one's from Joe Finley from Tennessee, and Joe says, Dear Editor, to begin with, the June Flash number 137 featuring Vengeance of the Immortal Villain was and always will be a classic. Now this is really saying something, since Bananarama, since most of any form of writing usually takes years to be considered a classic. The most probable reason for this is it takes years for readers to really fall in love with characters and actually think of them as real. I, for example, have to think for a moment to keep from believing that there really wasn't a Scarlett O'Hara or a Rhett Butler. For these characters, through Gone with the Wind and the movie production, have through the years become somewhat a part of the American heritage. To a lesser degree, the Justice Society has become such an institution to comic fans everywhere. So how could a story featuring fandom's greatest old favourites be anything else? Admittedly, the JSA's role was rather passive, as they were only victims of Vandal Savage. However, the vigorous action of the group's speediest member, the Flash, far offset this detriment. However, the mere appearance of the old Flash in the Justice Society of America would not have alone served to boost this story into the classic category. Mr. Fox and Mr. Infantino, and you, Sir Editor, could hardly have done a better job writing, drawing and coordinating this epic. Such touches as the illustration of the cover of All-Star Comics, that's very true.
Absolutely.
That was lovely. The various insights to the JSA's members' powers on page 12, and Mr. Joe Giela's excellent ink served to thrill me, as I'm sure it did fans everywhere. Joe Finley, Sparta, Tennessee. And the response says, now we know why writer Fox and artist Infantino Giella advises that they were going umbrella hunting.
Ho, ho, ho.
The next one is from Judith Player from West Hampton Beach in New York. And Judith says,
It's with great glee that I can point out an error in Vengeance of the Immortal Villain. Not only did you make the error, but you yourselves managed to point it out.
Judith's a troll.
What a reward for fans like me who read flashgrams and sigh wistfully over the brilliant letters sent in by those discerning critics who spot all the subtle and not so subtle mistakes. Fellow amateurs, rejoice! On page 24, The Flash, Barry Allen, explains why he was not deceived by Vandal Savage's duplicate in the following. When you credited it, the image-making machine must have used so much power, the lights dimmed. In that dim light, the irises of your eyes expanded. Your identical image shows these same expanded irises. When the bright light's shining, they should have been contracted. Now I refer you to the feature following page 9. What's the difference between? Please note the difference between expand and dilate. Please note also the Flash's use of expand was incorrect. The irises do not spread out in every direction, only laterally. I have no doubt that you can wiggle out of it somehow, but as for me, remember the old saw. A girl convinced against her will is of the same opinion still. Saw must mean saying. I've never heard of saw before.
It's interesting because we mentioned the house ad that mentioned World's Finest Mystery in Space, Sugar and Spike and Star Spangled Dinosaurs, but we didn't talk about the opposite page, which has what's the difference between.
It's one of these classic flash facts pages.
It's sort of, to educate and entertain. So it says 3 panels, topless lad, and it says expand to spread out, usually in every direction, thereby occupying more space or having more capacity as to expand one's chest. Then the next panel is a boy blowing a bubble gum or a balloon or something, and it says inflate, to blow out or swell a hollow body with air or gas, as in to inflate a balloon. And then the last one, it's got a shady looking character who looks a bit like William Hartnell in Brighton Rock, come down a flight of stairs carrying a candle. And it says dilate, to increase the width or circumference, as a dim light causes the pupils of the eyes to dilate. So, Barry's explanation, right enough.
Does say they expanded?
He says they expanded when, he probably meant to say dilated. Well, that's interesting. I'm glad Judith was there to point that out to us.
It is indeed. So thank you, Judith. If you're listening, thank you.
Yes. So the letters page finishes again with this issue's award winners. The original artwork pages for Vengeance of the Immortal Villain. Part 1 went to Alden Stallings, Part 2 to Joe Finley, and Part 3 went to Judith Player.
So there you are.
Wow.
Judith got the final part.
That's fantastic.
Judith got the artwork.
She got the artwork. She criticised. Fantastic. I wonder if she Tipp-X'd it out. Other correcting liquid materials are available. Right, so the Justice Society of America are back.
Hey.
I know, fantastic. We're getting to the really good stuff now, so they'll be back very soon.
And we'd love to hear what you thought about this story. So please get in touch with us. You can email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com, and we might even give you a shout out on the show.
Of course we will.
And you can also follow us on Facebook at the Earth2 Podcast.
And you can find us on Twitter at podcast_Earth2, with that being the number 2.
Yes, all our social medias are using the number 2, not the TWO. So they are. We're also on Instagram as well.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time on
the Earth2 Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.